Had a national ballistic fingerprinting system been in place, my son's life might have been spared.
Victims' families tragically misled by politicians and paraded before the cameras to promote their latest gun scheme, so-called ballistic fingerprinting, what they claim is the DNA of crime fighting.
This is not DNA. The politicians are basically selling the national database as something that it's not.
There's no DNA in a metal object that I know of, and there's no fingerprint.
Facts the politicians refuse to admit, and facts the media chooses to ignore, as we clearly saw in a recent report by Morley Safer of 60 Minutes. What they claim was investigative journalism, many forensic experts say was journalistic activism.
60 Minutes, I would expect it to be slanted the way they want it to be slanted. No, I didn't think it was fair.
Slanted with 60 Minutes' own anti-gun spin. Instead of clarifying, they confused viewers by claiming that the success of an existing system called IBIS, now used by 160 crime labs across the country, is just a preview of what a national database would do. But the investigators operating these systems tell us that's simply not true, because these computers only store and compare evidence from guns used in crimes to help catch a suspect, nothing else.
We only have the evidence recovered at crime scenes, and we're only putting in guns that are recovered in crimes. So we have a database that's manageable.
Manageable, a key word never mentioned by 60 Minutes. A national ballistic database would mean storing the markings of a fired bullet from every lawfully purchased handgun in the computer. Add to that the cartridge casings, and that means millions of images that would only overload the system.
What you're challenging the computer to do is take an unknown bullet and go into the database and compare it with presumably millions of other records. There's just no supercomputer in the world with that power.
A key fact uncovered in a recent study done by California's Department of Justice. But again, what 60 Minutes never told its viewers is that forensic experts test fired cartridge cases and then try to match them with the correct firearms. The computer failed to make a match up to 62% of the time.
That doesn't surprise me, but I would be equally surprised if there weren't in fact matches in there. That's not the point. The computer can't find them.
As a result, California's Department of Justice study concluded that, quote, automated computer matching systems do not provide conclusive results. So whatever possible matches they make still have to be manually reviewed by a forensic examiner. And that adds up to a lot of hours.
Let's say the computer is really good and can sort the number of potential matches down to 1% of the database. If there are 1 million records in the database, that's only 10,000 matches he has to look at personally.
But that's apparently not what Attorney General Bill Lockyer wanted to hear, so he tried to cover up the findings until the NRA filed a request under the Freedom of Information Act to have that report released. It was, but when I tried to call lab director Fred Tulliners, who had headed up that study, I quickly found out he had been gagged.
How can a state agency say, Mr. Tulliners, you cannot even talk about this? Wow.
But again, 60 Minutes never reported that, nor did it mention that since Attorney General Lockyer didn't like the results, he commissioned a leading European forensic expert, Dr. Jan de Kinder, to do an independent review. And guess what? He fully supported the initial study done by the DOJ, confirming that the bigger your database, the more unreliable and less effective it is in solving crimes.
The bottom line is, it is infinitesimal in its utility.
But the problems don't stop there. The so-called fingerprints of firearms can and do change from wear and tear, or they can be easily altered. How easy? Well, the NRA attempted to show 60 Minutes by asking one of the most reputable engineering firms in the country, Exponent, to conduct an independent, thorough demonstration to test how a criminal or anyone could defeat the system.
We showed you basically here the simplest way using the cheapest materials to modify a weapon. We just ran some abrasive paste on it and we wore off some tool marks. In fact, not a big investment, $10 to $20.
The whole process would take less than 15 minutes. It's no more difficult than a thorough cleaning of a firearm.
And to prove that, the 2 bullets, one test fired before the firearm was altered and one test fired after, are given to an examiner to compare under a microscope. The results?
You can see I can rotate the bullet, looking for a set of grooves that match between the two. Got good images, but a totally different grooving pattern. So a forensic examiner handed these 2 slugs would conclude that the weapons that fired them were different.
Different and permanently changed. Morley Safer was speechless, but you'd never know it. Instead, in his report, he went so far as to call the demonstration, quote, a how-to video, implying that the NRA would share it with criminals, and then went on to dismiss it as irrelevant, saying, quote, it proves it can be done. It doesn't prove it likely will be done.
They don't know what they're talking about. Criminals change the guns, change the parts.
To say that a criminal would not change the markings on his gun is ridiculous. Of course they will. Why not? It's easy enough to do.
And if the whole purpose of weapons fingerprinting is to get a unique match of tool marks, and with a simple and relatively easy application of abrasive, you can remove the tool marks, of course the whole hypothesis fails. The weapon can't be traced.
Beating the system, a system riddled with problems, as Maryland and New York are quickly finding out. Together, they've spent nearly $10 million on ballistic imaging systems and have nothing to show for it.
That's right. In 2 years, law's been in effect 2 years, not a single crime has been solved with it.
Reason enough for the Fraternal Order of Police to go on record stating that, quote, with such small chances that it would be used to solve a firearm crime, these are law enforcement dollars best spent elsewhere.
It really has been an incredible waste of money when money shouldn't be wasted. We would much be better to spend our money hiring prosecutors to prosecute gun crimes.
But don't tell that to ATF, who insists the California study showing that a national database would be, quote, impractical and create logistic complications so great they cannot be effectively addressed is flawed. But is that because, as 60 Minutes showed, ATF is working hand in hand with Forensic Technology, a Canadian company that hopes to sell its IBIS system to the U.S. government? The company turned down our request for an interview, saying, quote, it would be uncomfortable. But the vice president of FTI, who just happens to be a retired ATF agent, appeared on 60 Minutes, boasting about the ballistic database.
If you have a retired ATF agent who's the vice president of FTI, who's saying how good this system is, it's certainly a self-serving statement. Where is the objectivity there? There isn't any. They both have an agenda, ATF and FTI. They are in bed together, okay? And they're working in harmony to make this thing happen.
A determined agenda. And again, what 60 Minutes doesn't tell you is that it's your taxpayer dollars that are being squandered for politics and profit.
I think politics is driving it. I don't think it's a crime-fighting tool. And as a taxpayer, I would resent it that they're blowing money on something that's not going to work. I think the real agenda is ultimately national registration of firearms in America.
They would go so far as to take every single firearm out of the hands of anyone who's not a sworn law enforcement agent, period. That is their ultimate goal. And yet they try to lull you to sleep with this, we're not looking to go after the law-abiding citizen. It's a bunch of hogwash. It's hypocritical, and it's a lie, pure and simple.